Robert J. Booker. Well, Dr. Franklin was born in Knoxville, April 16, 1852, and he started to grade school when he was about 8 years old. But as soon as he enrolled, the Civil War broke out, and his schooling stopped. He didn't even have a chance to learn to write his name before the war started. But in 1863, when General Ambrose Burnside came down and occupied the city, then black schools were again allowed to resume, and Reverend Franklin became a student again. He was enrolled in the Levere School in 1870, which was organized by Reverend George Washington Levere, who was the first pastor at Shiloh Presbyterian Church. And there is a news article in the Knoxville Chronicle of June 1 that talks about Franklin as a youngster. Of course, by that time he was 18 years old, who had written this essay on the duty of citizenship. It was the kind of thing that black people needed to know about. They wanted blacks to see young people who were achieving, and Franklin was put upon a pedestal as a young fellow who could write like that and who could make that kind of speech. So he was kind of showcased. So that's really how he came to public attention initially. He was presented in various communities around Knoxville, reading the speech that he had written. And of course, one of the places he was showcased was in Rogersville, Tennessee, where he eventually settled. And the people in Rogersville were so impressed by the youngster that when they got ready to build St. Mark's Presbyterian Church, they wanted him to come and be their pastor. But he wasn't quite ready to go there yet. He needed to further his education. And so he did so until he did become pastor of that church. And as we know, the rest is history. Well, when he finished his grade school education here, he was qualified to teach elementary school, black children in elementary school. So he left here and went to Hudsonville, Mississippi, and taught there for 2 years. And he was able to save enough money to buy his mother a house. His father by that time had died, but he bought his mother a house. But he was always hungry for education, or more education, and he thought that Maryville College might provide what he needed, because Maryville College had always been very friendly to black students. Maryville College was established in 1819, and it had taught blacks in grade school. In fact, it bought a slave at one time, or the presbytery there bought a slave, educated him, and sent him as a missionary to Africa. So Reverend Franklin knew about that, and he enrolled in Maryville College in 1876. And he was a student leader there. He was president of the Athenian Society. And when people in the black community there wanted to get free education for blacks in that city, they called on Franklin to serve on committees with them, and he did. So during his 4 years at Maryville College, he was very much active in the community. And of course, he graduated there in 1880, becoming the first black person to graduate from the college department at Maryville College. There had been others who, as I say, went to grade school there, who had taken special courses, but he was the first black person to actually finish the classical college course at Maryville College. After he graduated from Maryville College in 1880, he went to Lane Seminary in Cincinnati and studied to be a minister. And he graduated from that institution in 1883. And all the while, he was writing for black publications. In fact, several of them were national black publications. He was highly praised by Garland Penn, who wrote a book on Negro editors and publishers in 1891, I believe it was, how Reverend Franklin was always making contributions to various publications around the country. And his writing was very clear. He knew a lot of things, and he shared the information with people as he saw fit. And then he decided to settle in Rogersville. This offer had been made to him some time about taking the pastorate of St. Mark's Presbyterian Church. So he took the pastorate and started a school there in the church. And of course that school eventually became Swift Memorial College. And it's interesting that in 1901, when the state law was passed, outlawing the mixing of the races in any school in the state of Tennessee, public schools had always been segregated, but schools like Maryville College, Knoxville College, and maybe a few others had taught both blacks and whites. But the state law outlawed that arrangement. So people who had been supporting Maryville College said, well, we need to help Reverend Franklin's school. So they began to pump money into his school in Rogersville to help make it successful, as it was growing by leaps and bounds and building new buildings and enlarging buildings and that kind of thing. Well, Swift was Swift Memorial Junior College, and it got to the point where it became a four-year college. And I'm not sure how long that lasted, but it reverted back to a junior college at some point. But I do know that he was well thought of in that community, and that was indicated when he died in 1935. Virtually all of the city of Rogersville closed down. All businesses closed down to pay tribute, when he was being funeralized. To be born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1852, under less than ideal circumstances, even though his father was a bricklayer, I'm sure they didn't have the money they needed, and under strict rules of segregation, not far from slavery, here was a boy who wanted an education, and he decided to get one even though it was extremely difficult for him. Not only did he get the basic education, but he became a prolific writer. He became an outstanding preacher. He formed a college coming from those very humble beginnings. So I think that says a lot for people who perhaps today live in public housing or who have less than ideal living conditions, to say this, you can succeed if you really want to. And I think Reverend Franklin is a model for that. Well, what one can imagine, Knoxville in 1861 had a tiny population, and of course the black population was smaller than that. Can't cite figures. But during the Civil War, some 25,000 Confederate soldiers were in this area, and then some 25,000 Yankee soldiers were in this area. They did bring food with them, so they had to live off the lean of the land, I guess you would call it. And they confiscated people's horses and pigs and cows and chickens and whatever. They knocked down people's outbuildings for fires and for whatever. They confiscated the corn, the tomatoes, the beans, the whatever was available. So it meant a very terrible hardship on the people who were trying to survive to begin with, and to have to put up with all of that, it was really, really tough. And I'm sure that with black people in particular, it was rougher on them than on the general population. Especially when the Confederates occupied the area, they were hard on both groups, whether they were slaves or free people. So you didn't know what was going to happen the next day. Even city council, Knoxville City Council, for the most part, couldn't get a quorum to have council meetings. The city decided to get rid of its police department, except for one policeman who collected the taxes. So it was a general hardship on everybody during that period of time. There were schoolhouses around the city, private schoolhouses, and they were taken to be used by military forces, whether they were used as hospitals or headquarters or something else. So all down the line, our citizens suffered during that war, from beginning to end.